And we are live. So welcome to Back to the Basics. I have a screen share up. I don't know if folks can see it, but we'll work from that as a sort of source-based discussion, but you are as important a part of this conversation as anyone else. So we'll go from there. And I'm gonna jump to the middle. Tonight we're gonna be discussing prayer in different ways. And so one way I thought we would do that is by looking at Maimonides, which is a funny thing to do, but Maimonides is a very organized thinker. And he had something called the Book of Mitzvot. So people know about different codes that Maimonides, the Jewish philosopher, legalist, doctor, nod to the doctors, wrote. So he tried to compile a list. There's a tradition, we have 613 commandments. But what are the 613? There are many more commandments in the written Torah than those 613. So Maimonides tried to enumerate them. One of what's called the Monea Mitzvot, mitzvah counters. He tried to count the different 613. And Ramban Nachmanides, his Spanish colleague, just a bit after, often disagreed or had some critique. So here, he says the following thing, and people can see, maybe I'll try and point. Do people see my finger pointing?
Yeah, I can see.
Yeah. So he says here, and I'll read this in the English, it is an affirmative precept of the Torah, that is a commandment, to say grace after a meal, as it is, so I think people are largely familiar with this concept of a blessing after a meal, which we discussed last time. And thou shalt eat and be satisfied and bless the Lord thy God. The Torah only imposes the obligation on a person when he is satisfied, or she, for it is said, when thou hast eaten and art satisfied, thou shalt bless, etc. According to the ordinances of the sages, however, even if one has eaten only as much food as the size of an olive, he recites grace after the meal. So just to break this down, the basic idea was when you're satisfied, meaning full, satiety. Perhaps it also implies a degree of having enjoyed the meal as opposed to eating to have been polite. The idea is eaten satisfied as opposed to eaten unsatisfied. I stress eat, so I'm never satisfied now. Something about the nature of the universe has left me never satisfied at the current moment. And but the sages came and said that that's nice, but we're going to impose an obligation to recite grace after meals, even if a person eats an olive's volume of food. Right? So the idea being that gratitude isn't only at full satiety, but we could be grateful for things of lesser value. We discussed that a bit last time. It is also an ordinance of the sages, this amorphous group of rabbis, as opposed to the Torah, that before partaking of any food, a blessing is first recited and then is eaten. So there's an after when you're full, but there's a before enjoying food. And however little one intends to eat or drink, the blessing is first recited and then the refreshment is taken. So it's not an olive's volume. It's not full, it's not any amount. If you're going to eat a crumb and enjoy it, then you should make a blessing beforehand. And one who wishes to smell a fragrant odor first recites the blessing and then enjoys the fragrance. This is something that often isn't known. And what I want, the question I kind of want to be in your minds is why? Why did the rabbis institute this idea of blessings on physical sensory enjoyment, like taste, like smell, before the experience? Okay, skip down a bit. So he relates prayer to this, and that's why we're discussing this. We're in the mission tour, okay. Just as blessings are recited when partaking of material enjoyments, so when about to fill any precept, that is a commandment, a blessing is said. after which the precept is performed. So let's just take that out of legal language. Before performing a mitzvah, there's a blessing, and the blessing happens before the mitzvah. Common examples people may know, Shabbat candles, right? There's a blessing before lighting Shabbat candles, even though that's a rabbinic mitzvah, but it is a blessing before the mitzvah. And so to any mitzvah, with some exceptions, but so blowing the shofar, reading the Megillah, sitting in a sukkah, all of these things have a blessing that happens beforehand. The sages have moreover instituted several blessings of praise and thanksgiving and petition. So 3 categories here: praise, thanksgiving, and petition. So let's just understand what those are. Praise, like praise the Lord, hallelujah. Thanksgiving, thank you. And petition, request, I need, we need healing. Please keep us safe. Please keep us healthy. Petition. So that sort of gets towards prayer, but there are blessings of these things. In order that when partaking of material enjoyments nor engaged in the fulfillment of religious duties, we should constantly have God in mind. I'm just gonna use the magical tools to see what the spotlight thing does. I'm just playing with this to keep it interesting for everyone here. We should constantly have God in mind. Did that light up for anyone? Did that like get highlighted?
Yeah, it's blue.
It's blue. Incredible. Constantly have God in mind. In the Hebrew, scrolling it up in case you like the resonance of the Hebrew, Kedei liskor tabori tamid uli yira mimenu. So in the Hebrew, it says, in order to be mindful of the Creator always. So that's better language, actually, the Hebrew, than the English translation here. In order to always be mindful of the Creator. Creator implies a certain appellation for God, so it's not the God of, it's Creator. It's the creative energy that sustains a thing. In order to constantly be mindful of the creative energy that underlies everything, uli yira mimenu, and to have awe of that thing. So to be in awe of the creative energy, that's the reason for all of these things. The blessings, the prayers, is to develop a state of awe. And so I will ask the question, why would one come to develop why would we want to develop a state of awe? Heschel spoke about this as radical amazement, as like the first religious impulse in his book, God in Search of Man. Why would this be an important thing? What does it come to fight against? Like, what would be the opposite of living in a state of relatively constant awe?
Can you ask that question again?
Yeah, why would so the rabbis did all these things, blessings and prayers and a whole liturgy. And the idea is so that we will be mindful constantly of the Creator and live in awe of her. So why would we want to do that? Like, what does that come to fight against? Well, what's the opposite of living with a state of awe of the Creator?
Despair.
Okay, so despair could be one opposite.
I would say carelessness.
Carelessness. Can you say more about that?
Just like you can eat an apple without thinking about how it was grown or how it was picked or how it was made, like just mindlessly eating. Like I've heard some people say like blessings prevent you from mindlessly eating. You have to really stop and think about what you're about to do and like even where it came from. Like either the original source or just like it was farmed, it was picked.
Okay, so we have Karen. Then Linda, could you say something more about despair? How does living in a state of awe prevent despair?
If you're living in a state of awe, then maybe you are able to, well, that means in my mind, almost amazement. And that is perhaps joy, perhaps gratitude, which would then just, making it real, like today, like every day for the last week or so, right? It takes a lot more of an effort to, find that awe.
Good. Okay. So just maybe an aside, right? But so Rebbe Nachman will enter in a little bit here. So we're experiencing a practical difficulty. Some of us, Linda has named it. I'm going to name it as well because I'm experiencing it. Maybe it's not your experience, either the people in this class or the millions of people listening out there when we send out this recording. And right, it's pretty anxiety and fear, even when reasonable, or what Rabbi Nachman termed da'aga, worry, or sometimes marash chora in a more strong form, marash chora, sort of a black bitterness, can really make it hard to cultivate a sense of the creator always, meaning now, right? The only always there ever is now. Hayom im bekolo tishma, today if we heed the voice. And so there's only ever now, which is obviously in the lived experience of us. And so that worry is one of the basic impediments. And so people spoke about stress and anxiety before the coronavirus, or that was already a topic in Western culture, I believe. I recall stress was a big deal last year even. But now, right, did people recall that? But now stress and anxiety have become this weird collective. They've almost like become some kind of creature, a leviathan of sorts, and they're embodied. And so there is a sense in which this brings us into the moment, right? I'm eating this apple. This apple, as we mentioned, right, the blessings on food are specific, as Emily was sort of alluding to, about where it came from. This came from a tree and not from the ground. So I have to think not just about God, the creator that made the apple, but I have to think a little bit about the pathway of the apple, the tree. This is the fruit of a tree and not of the ground or of bread or something else. And so this sense of recognizing not just mindful eating, but it's sort of a frame for mindful eating, right, is a whole different thing. Is to say, it's not just I'm eating this apple mindfully, but I'm cognizant of the creator who creates this apple at this moment. And this is one use of the word bore, which I want to highlight here in the Rambam, creator, tamid, always, which is that, right, in the morning prayers, it features heavily, hamechadesh betuvo b'choyom, and I'll get off my soapbox in a minute, but hamechadesh betuvo b'choyom tamid, that constantly God is renewing creation, is the idea of a continuous renewal of creation. And so it's not just an apple, but it's an apple that the creator is making. And once it enters this sort of spiritual monotheistic framework or panentheistic framework, however you want to frame it, but it's the same creator that creates every other thing. And so it creates a sense of collectivism or unity of spiritual connection between all things. And so in that way, the act of eating the apple becomes framed in a totally different way, uli yira mimenu, and will hopefully lead to a sense of awe. Just the basic question, what is this? Like, wow, I'm here and I'm eating an apple. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff to worry about, and that worry is, advantageous evolutionarily, and it's now prompting hopefully effective action to avert bigger catastrophe, right? So that anxiety has a useful, it's not only to be avoided, and avoiding it isn't ever really a way to deal with it, but this is a different thing. It's about grounding these moments as moments of spiritual vitality, which change the way we live. Li Rami Menu. Okay, so that's the Rambam's language in the Mishnah Torah, in his code of law. In the Sefer HaMitzvot, in his book of 613 commandments, not all of the rabbinic laws, but just what are the commandments, he relates prayer to this. And I wanted to read this inside. And can everyone see my arrow? Whoa, I left like an accountant style signing thing there.
Yes.
People see it? It's like tax day.
Yes.
Here in the thing. I'm welcome. I think we had someone else join the class under the title Eric's. I don't know if it's okay to just interrupt for a moment if you want and introduce yourself or say who you are so we know who is there under the title Eric S or Eric's. You can unmute if you want, no pressure. But feel free to just say who you are and introduce yourself. Or not. All right. And so The fifth mitzvah, this is the fifth mitzvah of the 613, is that we are commanded to serve God, blessed be He. So the Hebrew, I have to click mouse to use the mouse again. Apologies. Right, Hushatzivanu la'ovdo. I'll just read and translate if that's okay. We're commanded to serve God. Ukvar niflta tzivot ma'im ba'amru v'vadatem et Hashem Elokechem. And this commandment is repeated many times when they said, "You shall serve the Lord your God." V'amar ve'oto ta'avodu. And it also says, "He you should serve," meaning God alone and not idols or other things. V'afal pi shezat tzivoy hu gam kein. And even though this is sort of a general commandment to serve God, as we mentioned in the roots of the principles, before the mitzvahs in the Rambam's list of 613, there are explanations of the principles involved, and there are certain things which are too general to be a mitzvah. Right? There are things you should do, but they're not specific enough to be a commandment. In the Yeshbo, where did I go here? But there is a specific manifestation of this, which is prayer. Velashon Sifri, Ovdo, the language of the Midrash Halacha, the rabbinic interpretation of the Torah, says, Ula Ovdo, serve God, zo tfilah. This is prayer. To serve God means to pray. Va'amru gam kein ula ovdo zo Talmud. And they also said to serve God, this is study. Uva Mishnah Tosha Rabbi Eliezer Benosha Rabbi Yossi Aglili. And in the what's called the Mishnah or the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, it's a rabbinic collection of teachings. They ask, Amru minayin leikar tefillah mitzvah. Where do we know that prayer is a mitzvah? It says, God you should fear or be in awe of, again that root in awe, and He you should serve. Amru avduhu b'torato v'avduhu b'mikdasho. You serve Him in His teaching, and you serve Him in His mikdash, in His temple. Rotza lamar. You should gather there to pray in the Mikdash, as King Solomon explained. Okay, so a few questions. There are two things here which are called service of God, and even though they're general in the Torah, you should serve God, they sort of derive two specific commandments from them. One here is listed, prayer. The other mentioned is study. So how are prayer or study manifestations of fear God or being awe of God, which are related? Fear and awe are subtly related. They have a different resonance in English, but in Hebrew they are the same. Yoto ta'avod, and God we should worship. So if anyone just wants to comment about, and it could be personal, it could be like theoretical, or it could be very personal for you, like in your prayer life, in your study. Do we study as a service? What does it look like to study or pray as a service to God? The kind of serving. And does it cultivate fear or awe? Does it come from it? Does it cultivate it? Anything? Okay, so I'll pause here just to note, since this is the Back to the Basics class, this is the position of the Rambam. It's the thing to know that prayer is biblical, that when the Bible says, when the Torah says worship God, it means pray. That's what the Torah means. It's kind of, the Torah is broad in its plain meaning, but the specific manifestation of that is prayer, and that is intended. It's not the only thing intended, but it's included and intended to be one of the 613 commandments in those many sort of citations. And so it's biblical. The idea that each day we have to pray is a commandment in the Torah. The Ramban, which we have here, Nachmanides, are, and I don't know if people are familiar with the Rambam and the Ramban, Maimonides and Nachmanides, Moshe ben Maimon, Moshe ben Nachman. Ramban lived a little bit after Rambam, also in Spain, also a great halachist, wrote incredible commentaries on the Talmud, but also he was a mystic. Maimonides was a philosopher, very influenced by Greek schools of philosophy, and Ramban was heir to a mystical tradition. Both were doctors. So Ramban disagrees, and he sort of notes this here, and he says, no, it's not true. Prayer is rabbinic. The rabbis made the prayers. And we know that because there are different times, we won't read it inside, when when in the Talmud it says, what if you're not sure if you prayed? What if you can't pray in different situations? And it says, don't worry about it, basically because it's dirabanan, it's rabbinic. And so regularly, there's a principle, safek da'oraisa l'chumra. If there's a doubt about a biblical law, did I eat matzah or didn't I eat matzah on Passover? If I can't remember if I've eaten matzah, consult your stomach. But if that doesn't aid you, then you should be strict with the biblical law and do it again. We should be careful with things in the Torah. But what the rabbis said, we should do it. But if we fail to do it, or there's a pressing circumstance, leniency is the rule rather than stringency. So there's sort of guidance about what should we have a stricter attitude towards and what a more lenient attitude towards. Rabbinic rules, rabbinic things get a more lenient attitude. There's a great, a very academic debate, how many angels dance on the head of a pin, in a sefer called the Shev Shmaisa. It's learned in many yeshivas about, is this idea that we should treat biblical rules stringently and rabbinic rules leniently, is that rabbinic or biblical? Okay, that's a different thing. So the Rambam basically says not true, that prayer is biblical, not the number, not the times, not when these are general rules that the Torah is saying you should serve God. It doesn't have a specific thing, but there is sort of a time, it's a long commentary, when it's different. Let's just find here. He does say, right, Shenumad Torato Shenipel Be'eta Tzarot V'Tianenu V'Lavenu Elav K'nei Avadim El Yado Nehem V'Zek Inen Shekatuv V'Chitavo Milchama B'Artzachem Al Tzara Tzoreretchem V'Erotem B'Chatzotot V'Nizkartem Lefnei Hashem Elokechem. There is a mitzvah, a commandment in the Torah, he feels, to pray when there is great communal distress, when something very difficult is happening, not on an individual level, but on a communal level. And that is derived from the rule that when there's a war in your land, for that oppression, you should sound the trumpets and blast them as a sort of memorial before God. Right? So it's not just a cry to battle, but it's a cultivation of awe at the moment of, in this case, war and invasion. Al tzarasha tavo latzibor, for a difficulty that's come to the whole community, lizok lifanav batfilah, to cry out in prayer, uvatrua, and with trumpets, right, with blasts. Behua inyan shabir shalom alav shalom. That's what King Solomon. Okay, and he goes on. So that's his basic principle, and it's something you should know. This is a sort of famous debate in Judaism: is prayer biblical or rabbinic? The answer is, for the Rambam, it's biblical. For Ramban, Nachmanides, it is only a biblical prayer when there's real distress, or I'm going to twist that as need. Now, one of the difficulties I think that many people report with prayer, particularly petitionary prayer, requests, are that a lot of people feel like they don't have a lot. They're really, in our, I don't know. Do you feel like on another day, on a day where everything seems fine, you have like legitimate burning things that you feel need to be expressed passionately before God, as a sort of cry out before God? Is that useful? Is that useful in a time of distress? What would be the difference between a time of communal distress and just a regular time? Is it not always a time of communal stress for the needy among us or for some group of people? I'm gonna just raise some of these questions to the fore, and if anyone has anything they want to say about any of that. If not, we'll have just, yeah.
Well, I would just say that one of my struggles with prayer is, and there's a lot of them, is it feels, I don't know what other words to use to express this. This isn't quite what I mean, but so the only way I can think of to say it is it seems very, because they're pre-written, it seems kind of one way almost, in a way. And then the hope is it will open some kind of channel of communication. I guess in a time of communal strife, which is also quite current, everything is heightened because there's no place to turn where it's not happening. And so we strive for connections, and doing things together feels more powerful. But I don't know.
So I've sent a poll question. Did it, are people seeing the poll question?
No.
No.
Where would it be?
You know, I don't know. I created a poll about prayer for the participants, and I don't know if it would show up in the chat feature or not.
Let's look.
If not, I'll get better at Zoom. I'm still new.
No.
So you raised a couple of interesting questions. Should we? So does anyone else? Let's speak to this: the crafted nature of prayer. It's something actually that was in our Mishnah Berurah source, our Mishnah Torah source earlier. I skipped over it in this lecture, but I'll go there now, and that's this. The Nusach Kol Brachot Ezra Veit Dino Tiknum. The blessing, the text of all the blessings were fixed by Ezra and his court. The Ein Ra'oi L'Shanotam V'lo L'Hosif Alachat Mehem V'lo L'Gro Mimena. And one cannot change them, not add to them, not detract from them. This sort of doctrine, right? That prayers are fixed, the texts are fixed. One cannot add, one cannot subtract, and one cannot change the words. So, Linda, you're expressing, I think, what is a super common frustration with that. So does anyone else want to speak to that, the sort of fixed nature of liturgical prayer and what that does in your personal experience?
Well, there's a comment from Eric that I don't know if everyone sees it.
I see a hand is raised. If you unmute yourself, we can hear you. I think you're muted. I can unmute you. I've unmuted you. And there's a chat. Let's see. Oh,
it's in the chat. He doesn't have a mic. It looks like.
Oh, wow. People. Oh, I see. Bob hears and sees me. I see. I'm now seeing the chat. I'm sorry, everyone.
Okay.
Hi, it's Eric Stieglitz. I don't have a microphone. Prayer is personal, speaks to everyone. Rabbi, if you can see this, the days after September 11th, I remember when Dr. Rappaport said, Unatana Tokef, it really spoke to me using those 1,000-year-old words. Sorry, I have no mic. Helpful. So, okay, so there is another, okay, so a few things. One of the things that the sages said about prayer, right? And why did they fix the prayer? So the reason the prayer was fixed, according to the Talmud in Brachot, is that prayers were fixed because the fear was that if we didn't fix a text for prayer and said, everyone please say prayer on your own, then no one would pray. I guess there's another fear, right, which the Rambam sort of expressed, which is everyone would pray in their own language. People didn't know Hebrew as well at that point, and sort of prayer would become confused and non-unifying. But so there's this fear both of prayer not happening, prayer becoming disorganized, prayer becoming every person on their own and not something that, you know, even if you go to very different sorts of synagogues or even between religions, there are honestly great commonalities between the prayer services that occurred from a like bird's eye view.